Welcome to the Whispered Ages. This episode is about the Knight's Shadow, a day in the life of a squire. We appreciate your support for this channel. Please consider liking and subscribing. Now on with the episode. The stone is cold beneath bare feet in the hour before dawn. It is always cold, even in summer, even when the day promises heat that will make armor unbearable, and horses lather white with effort. But now, in this suspended moment before the world truly wakes, there is only the chill rising through the floor of the small chamber, the darkness that exists before candles are lit, and the sudden sharp awareness that today is not like other days. Today is tournament day. The young man who rises from his pallet of straw and rough wool is perhaps 15 years old, perhaps 17. The sources from this period rarely concern themselves with such precise details about those who served, rather than those who commanded. What we know is that he has been in service to his knight for several years now, long enough that his hands have developed calluses in specific patterns from specific tasks, long enough that his muscles remember the weight of chainmail even when his mind is still climbing up from sleep. He is not yet a knight himself, though that is the distant promise that justifies everything. Every exhausted morning, every menial task, every moment of standing in another man's shadow. The medieval squire occupied a curious position in the social architecture of his time. He was neither servant nor equal, neither child nor fully adult. The word itself comes from the Old French esquire, which in turn derives from the Latin scuterius, meaning shield-bearer. And while carrying a shield was indeed among his duties, this etymology captures only a fragment of what the role entailed. A squire was an apprentice in the most profound sense, learning not merely a trade, but an entire way of being in the world. Most squires came from noble families themselves, younger sons or boys from lesser branches of aristocratic houses. The arrangement was reciprocal. A knight gained an assistant whose social standing made him trustworthy with valuable equipment and sensitive information, while the squire gained access to training, connections, and the possibility of eventual knighthood. Some squires served their own fathers or uncles, though many were sent away to serve in other households, the theory being that distance from family would toughen them and broaden their education in the ways of chivalric culture. Our squire this morning, let us call him simply that, the squire, for he represents thousands of young men across centuries who performed these same tasks, with these same aching shoulders and these same nervous stomachs rises in darkness, because there is no alternative. The tournament will begin when the sun reaches a certain height, when the nobility have broken their fast and the crowds have gathered and the heralds have made their announcements. But the work that makes such spectacle possible begins hours earlier, in silence and shadow, with hands that must be steady despite the cold. He reaches for his clothes by memory and touch. There is no mirror in his small space, no luxury of any kind. The chamber he occupies is attached to his knight's quarters, close enough that he can respond to any summons within moments, small enough that it contains only the necessities of sleep and the storage of his few personal possessions. His clothing is simple but well made. A linen shirt, wool hose, a tunic that identifies him as part of his knight's household through its colors. He dresses quickly, because speed is a virtue that has been trained into him, and because the cold motivates efficiency. The tournament grounds have been prepared for days now. Workers have erected the lists, the barriers that define the jousting lanes, and constructed the viewing stands where nobles will sit in relative comfort, while common folk press against the outer barriers for a glimpse of the action. Pavilions have risen like fabric mushrooms across the field, each one flying the colors of a participating knight, each one a small command center, where squires and servants will spend the day in controlled chaos. The squire has watched these preparations with growing anxiety, knowing that each hammer stroke and each rope pulled tight brings the moment of testing closer. For make no mistake, tournament day tests the squire as surely as it tests the knight. The knight will face physical danger, certainly, will risk broken bones and worse in the violent collision of lance against shield. But the knight's reputation, his honor, his very identity as a warrior, depends in no small part on the quality of the equipment he carries into combat. A loose strap can mean a helmet that shifts at the critical moment. A missed spot of rust can become a point of failure where a lance tip finds purchase. A poorly sharpened sword can fail to deliver the blow that ends a melee encounter in victory rather than defeat. The squire carries this weight of responsibility as he lights his first candle of the day, the small flame struggling against the darkness before catching and holding. In this light, barely enough to see by, he will begin the work that defines his existence. The relationship between knight and squire was built on a foundation of absolute trust, yet it was not a relationship of equals. The knight commanded, the squire obeyed. The knight received glory, the squire received the satisfaction of having contributed to that glory. This might seem unbalanced to modern sensibilities, but it reflected a worldview in which hierarchy was not merely accepted, but understood as natural and necessary. The squire's subordination was temporary, a stage in his development rather than a permanent condition, and the knight's authority carried with it obligations of teaching, protection, and eventual sponsorship when the squire was ready to be elevated. Some knights took these obligations seriously, treating their squires with a mixture of discipline and genuine mentorship. Others were harsh, demanding, even cruel. The sources from this period include complaints about knights who worked their squires to exhaustion, who beat them for minor failures, who treated them as little better than common servants. But they also include accounts of deep bonds formed between knight and squire, relationships that lasted long after the squire had earned his own spurs and established his own household. Our squire has been fortunate in his master. Though fortune is perhaps too simple a word, his knight is demanding but fair, expects excellence but teaches the skills necessary to achieve it, and has never struck him in anger, only in training, when learning to take a blow was part of the lesson. This is not a relationship of affection, exactly, but it is one of mutual respect that has grown over years of shared effort. Now, in the candlelight, that relationship will be tested. The squire moves to where the armor is stored, each piece in its designated place, and begins the work that will occupy him until the sun rises and beyond. The first task is inspection, and inspection begins with the hands. In the dim light of a single candle, the eyes cannot be fully trusted. Shadows fall in misleading patterns, and even obvious flaws might be hidden in darkness. But the fingertips know the truth. They have learned to read metal the way a scholar reads parchment, detecting information that would be invisible to the untrained touch. The squire begins with the helmet, lifting it carefully from its resting place and bringing it close to the candle. This is a great helm, the enclosed type that covers the entire head and face, offering maximum protection at the cost of limited visibility and restricted breathing. It is heavy in his hands, perhaps 5 pounds or more, and he rotates it slowly, running his fingers over every surface. What he searches for is rust, the eternal enemy of steel. Rust is not merely cosmetic damage, it is structural weakness, a slow consumption of the metal that can turn a reliable piece of armor into a death trap. In the damp climate of much of medieval Europe, rust was a constant threat, appearing overnight on any surface that had not been properly oiled and stored. The squire's fingers know the texture of healthy steel, smooth and slightly oily from previous treatment. They also know the roughness of rust, the way it catches at the skin, the subtle granularity that signals corrosion has begun. He finds a spot near the base of the helmet, where the metal curves to protect the back of the neck. It is small, perhaps the size of a fingernail, but it is there a patch of roughness where moisture has begun its work. He sets the helmet aside, mentally noting the location. This will need treatment before the tournament begins. Steel wool and oil applied with careful pressure to remove the corrosion without damaging the underlying metal. The breastplate comes next, the largest single piece of armor, and therefore the one with the most surface area to inspect. It is a work of considerable craftsmanship, shaped to deflect blows rather than absorb them directly, with a raised ridge down the center that helps guide lance points away from the vital organs beneath. The squire runs his hands over the entire surface, front and back, feeling for dents that might indicate hidden stress in the metal, for rough patches that might signal rust, for any irregularity that should not be there. Medieval armor was not the crude, heavy shell that popular imagination sometimes suggests. By the period we are discussing, armorers had developed sophisticated techniques for shaping steel to the human body, creating pieces that distributed weight effectively and allowed for surprising mobility. A full suit of plate armor might weigh 50 to 60 pounds, but this weight was spread across the entire body rather than concentrated in one area. A fit knight in well-made armor could mount a horse without assistance, could fight for extended periods, could even perform acrobatics if the stories are to be believed. But this functionality depended entirely on the quality of construction and maintenance. A dent in the breastplate might seem minor, but it could create a stress point where the metal would eventually crack under impact. A loose rivet might hold for 100 blows and then fail on the 101st, at precisely the wrong moment. The Squire's inspection is not paranoid caution, it is the bare minimum of responsible preparation. He works his way through each piece systematically. The pauldrons that protect the shoulders, articulated to allow arm movement while still covering the vulnerable joint. The vambraces and rear braces that guard the forearms and upper arms. The gauntlets, those intricate constructions of overlapping plates that must protect the hands while still allowing the fingers to grip sword and reins. The cuisses and greaves and sabatons that armor the legs from hip to toe. Each piece receives the same careful attention, the same methodical examination by touch and by the limited light available. The process takes considerable time. The sun has not yet risen, will not rise for some while yet, and the Squire works in a bubble of candlelight surrounded by darkness. His fingers grow cold from handling metal that has absorbed the chill of the night, and he pauses occasionally to warm them against his body before continuing. Cold fingers lose sensitivity, and sensitivity is everything in this work. He finds 2 more spots of incipient rust, one on a gauntlet and one on the inside of a greave, where sweat and moisture can accumulate during use. He finds a rivet on one of the pauldrons that seems slightly loose, moving more than it should when he applies pressure. He finds a scratch on the breastplate that he does not remember seeing before, perhaps acquired during the last training session, perhaps during transport to the tournament grounds. None of these issues are catastrophic, but all require attention. The metallurgy of medieval armor was sophisticated for its time, though it would seem primitive by modern standards. Armorers understood that steel could be hardened through heating and rapid cooling, that different quenching media produced different results, that the carbon content of the metal affected its properties. They worked largely by experience and tradition rather than scientific understanding, but their empirical knowledge was extensive. A master armorer could produce steel that was hard enough to resist cutting, while still being tough enough to absorb impact without shattering a balance that is not easy to achieve. The Squire does not understand the chemistry of what he handles, but he understands its behavior. He knows that this particular breastplate was made by a respected armorer in a distant city, purchased at considerable expense, and that it has served his knight well through several tournaments and one actual military campaign. He knows that the helmet is newer, a replacement for one that was damaged beyond repair in a jousting accident that left his knight unconscious for 2 days. He knows that the gauntlets are the weakest link in the ensemble, older pieces that have been repaired multiple times and should probably be replaced when funds allow. This knowledge shapes his inspection, tells him where to look most carefully, where the hidden weaknesses are most likely to lurk. The gauntlets receive extra attention, every articulation point tested, every rivet checked. The helmet, being newer, should be in better condition, but he examines it just as thoroughly because assumptions kill. By the time he completes his initial inspection, the first grey light of dawn is beginning to filter through the small window of his chamber. He has a mental list of issues to address, ranked by urgency and severity. The loose rivet is the most concerning. It will need to be tightened or replaced before the tournament begins. The rust spots are manageable with the materials he has on hand. The scratch is cosmetic, but appearances matter in tournament culture, where a knight's equipment reflects his status and honor. He sets aside the pieces that need work and begins gathering his tools and supplies. The real labor of the day is only beginning. The smell of neat's foot oil is distinctive, almost alive in its organic richness. It comes from the shin bones and feet of cattle, rendered down through a process that extracts the oils from the bone marrow. The result is a substance that has been used for centuries to condition leather, to keep it supple and water resistant, to prevent the cracking and brittleness that comes with age and exposure. The Squire knows this smell as intimately as he knows the smell of his own body, perhaps more so. It is the smell of his work, his purpose, his daily existence. He begins with the saddle, the most complex piece of leather equipment in his care. A war saddle is not like the saddles used for ordinary riding. It is designed to hold a knight securely during the violent impacts of combat, with a high cantle at the back to prevent being pushed off and a raised pommel at the front to brace against. It is heavy, perhaps 30 pounds or more, and working on it requires either removing it from its stand or working in awkward positions that strain the back and shoulders. The squire has done this hundreds of times, and his body moves through the motions with the efficiency of long practice. He applies the oil with a cloth, working it into the leather with circular motions that distribute the substance evenly, while also massaging it deep into the material. The leather is dry from storage, thirsty for the oil, and it absorbs the first application quickly. He adds more, working section by section, feeling the leather transform under his hands from stiff and resistant to supple and yielding. There is something meditative in this work, a rhythm that quiets the anxious mind. The circular motions become automatic, freeing the conscious attention to drift. The squire finds himself thinking about the tournament ahead, imagining the jousts and melees, picturing his knight in victory, and he pushes the thought away in defeat. He thinks about his own future, the knighthood that awaits him if he continues to serve well, the household he might one day command, the squire who might one day oil his saddle in the early morning darkness. The saddle takes nearly an hour of continuous work. When he finishes, the leather gleams softly in the growing light, transformed from a dull, dry brown to a rich, deep color that speaks of quality and care. He moves on to the bridle, the reins, the various straps and harnesses that connect horse to rider and armor to body. Each piece has its own character, its own history of use and repair. The bridle is relatively new, purchased after the old one finally wore through at a critical stress point. The reins are older, the leather softened by years of handling, by the sweat of the horse's neck and the grip of the rider's hands. Some of the armor straps have been replaced multiple times, the leather wearing faster than the metal it secures. The squire works through each piece with the same methodical attention he applied to the armor inspection. He looks for cracks, for thin spots where the leather might be wearing through, for stitching that has begun to fray. He finds a buckle that is not closing as securely as it should, the tongue worn down from repeated use. He notes it for later attention. The buckle will need to be replaced, but that is work for after the tournament, not before. The oil work continues as the sun rises higher, as the sounds of the waking tournament grounds begin to filter into the small chamber. The squire hears voices, distant but growing closer, the calls of vendors setting up their stalls, the whinnying of horses being led to water, the clatter of equipment being moved. The world is coming alive around him, but he remains focused on his task, on the circular motions, on the transformation of leather under his hands. This focus is not natural. It has been trained into him over years of service. A young boy, first arriving in a knight's household, would have been distracted by every sound, every movement, every new experience. He would have rushed through his tasks, eager to see what was happening elsewhere, to be part of the excitement rather than hidden away in preparation. But that boy has been shaped by discipline and repetition into this young man who can maintain concentration, despite fatigue, despite anxiety, despite the knowledge that momentous events are approaching. The training of a squire was comprehensive, encompassing far more than the care of equipment. He learnt to ride, of course, and to fight with sword and lance and other weapons. He learnt the complex etiquette of noble society, the proper forms of address, the intricate rules of precedence that determined who sat where at table and who entered a room first. He learnt to serve at meals, to carve meat according to specific traditions, to pour wine without spilling. He learnt heraldry, the system of symbols and colors that identified noble houses, so that he could recognize friend from foe on a chaotic battlefield. But beneath all these specific skills lay a more fundamental training, the training of attention, of presence, of being fully engaged with the task at hand regardless of what that task might be. A squire who could not focus was a squire who would make mistakes, and mistakes in this context could be fatal. The meditation of leather work was not recognized as such. The concept of meditation as we understand it was foreign to medieval European culture, but the effect was similar. The repetitive physical task created a state of calm alertness, a quieting of the anxious mind that allowed for both relaxation and readiness. The squire finishes the last of the leather work as the morning light grows strong enough that he no longer needs his candle. He extinguishes the flame, watching the small trail of smoke rise and dissipate, and allows himself a moment of stillness before moving to the next task. His shoulders ache from the sustained effort, and his fingers are slick with oil that will take multiple washings to fully remove. But the leather is ready, supple and strong, and that is what matters. He turns now to the weapons, and the nature of his work changes. The sound of steel against whetstone is ancient, a whisper of friction that has accompanied human civilization for millennia. It is a sound of preparation, of intention, of the transformation of raw potential into refined capability. The squire has heard this sound so many times that it has become part of the background of his existence, yet today it seems sharper, more significant. Today, the edge he creates may be tested in ways that training cannot fully replicate. He begins with the sword, his knight's primary weapon for the melee portions of the tournament. It is a hand-and-a-half sword, sometimes called a bastard sword, designed to be used with one hand while mounted or with two hands when on foot. The blade is perhaps 35 inches long, double-edged, with a fuller groove running down the center that reduces weight without sacrificing strength. The crossguard is simple but functional, the grip wrapped in leather that has been worn smooth by use. Sharpening a sword is not simply a matter of running stone against steel until the edge feels keen. Different parts of the blade serve different purposes and require different approaches. The first several inches near the point are used for thrusting and must be sharp enough to penetrate the gaps in armor, the vulnerable points at joints and visor slits. The middle section does most of the cutting work and must hold an edge through repeated impacts. The section near the guard, sometimes called the forte, is used for blocking and binding, and need not be as sharp. Indeed, some fighting techniques involve gripping this part of the blade with the offhand, which would be impossible if it were razor keen. The squire understands these distinctions instinctively, his hands adjusting the angle and pressure of the stone as he works along the blade's length. He uses a coarse stone first, addressing any nicks or rolls in the edge that have developed during training, then moves to finer stones that refine the edge to its final keenness. The process requires patience and attention. Too much pressure will remove more metal than necessary, shortening the blade's useful life, while too little will fail to achieve the desired sharpness. Testing the edge is a delicate matter. The squire has small scars on his fingers from early mistakes, lessons paid for in blood that he has never forgotten. Now he tests by feel and by sight, running his thumb lightly across the edge at an angle that will not cut, looking at how light reflects from the metal. A properly sharp edge will show almost no reflection, the steel so thin at the apex that light passes through rather than bouncing back. There is a philosophy embedded in this work, though the squire might not articulate it in such terms. A well-maintained weapon is a form of respect, respect for the craft of the smith who made it, respect for the tradition of martial skill that the squire is learning, respect for the opponents who will face this blade. A dull or poorly maintained weapon suggests carelessness, a lack of seriousness about the endeavor of combat. In tournament culture, where honor and reputation were currencies as valuable as gold, such carelessness could damage a knight's standing regardless of his actual skill. The sword complete, the squire turns to the lance. This is a different kind of inspection, as lances are not sharpened in the conventional sense. Tournament lances are typically equipped with coronel's blunted tips, designed to spread the impact force rather than penetrate, which reduce but do not eliminate the danger of the joust. The squire checks the shaft for cracks or weaknesses, running his hands along the smooth wood, feeling for any irregularity that might indicate structural compromise. A broken lance is expected in jousting. Indeed, breaking one's lance against an opponent's shield is a sign of a solid hit and earns points in the scoring. But a lance that breaks prematurely, that shatters before impact due to a hidden flaw in the wood, is both dangerous and embarrassing. Splinters can fly in unpredictable directions, and a knight left without a weapon in the middle of a pass is vulnerable and ridiculous. The squire has witnessed such failures and has no intention of allowing one to happen to his knight. He inspects 3 lances in total, the number his knight will have available for the jousting portion of the tournament. Each is perhaps 12 feet long, made of ash wood that combines strength with relative lightness. The coronels are checked for security, the hand grips for proper positioning, the overall balance for any sign of warping or damage. 2 of the lances pass inspection without issue. The third has a small crack near the base that concerns him. He sets it aside, marking it as a last resort to be used only if the others are broken. The dagger comes last, a shorter blade that serves as a weapon of final resort in close combat and as a tool for the myriad small tasks of daily life. It is less glamorous than the sword, less dramatic than the lance, but in some ways more personal. Knight's dagger is always with him, worn at the belt, even in social situations where other weapons would be inappropriate. It is the weapon of intimacy, of desperation, of the moment when all other options have failed. The squire sharpens it with the same care he applied to the sword, though the task takes less time due to the smaller blade. He tests the point, the edges, the balance in his hand. It is ready. The weapon's work complete, he allows himself a moment to contemplate what he has prepared. These instruments of violence rest on the workbench before him, gleaming with oil and sharp with purpose. They are beautiful in their way, the product of skilled craftsmanship and careful maintenance. They are also deadly, capable of ending lives or maiming bodies in an instant of miscalculation. The tournament is not war, but it is not entirely separate from war either. Knights have died in tournaments, struck down by lances that found gaps in armor, or by horses that fell and crushed their riders. The rules and conventions that govern tournament combat reduce the danger but cannot eliminate it. The squire knows this, has seen injuries and heard stories of deaths, and this knowledge gives weight to his preparations. He is not merely cleaning equipment, he is preparing the tools that will protect his knight's life and potentially threaten the lives of others. This moral complexity was not something medieval people ignored, though they framed it differently than we might. The church had at various times attempted to ban or restrict tournaments, concerned about the violence and the deaths, about the pride and vanity that such spectacles encouraged. These efforts had largely failed, as the nobility proved unwilling to abandon an institution so central to their culture and identity. But the tension remained, an awareness that the celebration of martial prowess existed in uneasy relationship with Christian teachings about peace and humility. The squire does not dwell on these theological questions this morning. His faith is real but practical, expressed in quick prayers before sleep and attendance at Mass when duties permit. He accepts the world as he finds it, a world in which knights fight and squires serve and tournaments are occasions of honor and excitement. His role is not to question but to prepare, and prepare he has. He gathers the weapons and moves to the next stage of his work, where the heaviest and most demanding tasks await. Chainmail is an experience as much as an object. The thousands of interlocked iron rings create a fabric of metal that moves almost like cloth, flowing and shifting with a sound like distant rain on leaves. It is also extraordinarily heavy, a full hauberk weighing 25 pounds or more, and handling it requires both strength and technique. The squire lifts his knight's hauberk from its storage hook, feeling the familiar weight settle into his arms. The mail has been in the family for generations, repaired and modified over the years, but still fundamentally the same garment that protected his knight's grandfather in actual combat. It carries history in its rings, stories of battles and tournaments past, of wounds received and blows deflected. Cleaning chainmail is a laborious process that the squire has performed countless times. The traditional method involves placing the mail in a barrel with sand and vinegar, then rolling the barrel to create friction that scours rust and grime from the rings. This has already been done in the days leading up to the tournament. Today's task is the final polish, the removal of any remaining residue, the application of oil to prevent rust from forming during the day's exertions. He works section by section, spreading the mail across his work surface and examining each area in the morning light. The rings are small, perhaps a quarter-inch in diameter, and each one must be checked for integrity. A broken ring creates a weakness in the armor's protection and can also snag on other rings, causing the damage to spread. He finds 2 broken rings and marks their locations with thread. They will need to be replaced, but that is delicate work requiring tools he does not have time to use this morning. The oil is applied with a cloth, worked into the rings with the same circular motions used on leather. The mail absorbs oil differently, the metal surfaces requiring less penetration but more thorough coverage. The squire's hands grow black with residue as he works, iron oxide and old oil mixing into a dark paste that will take scrubbing to remove. Meanwhile, the plate armor awaits its own preparation. Polishing plate is a different challenge from maintaining mail, requiring different techniques and different standards. Plate armor in tournament culture was not merely functional. It was a statement of wealth and status, and a knight's armor was expected to gleam. A dull or tarnished breastplate suggested poverty or carelessness, neither of which was acceptable in the competitive social environment of the tournament. The squire uses a paste of fine sand and oil, applied with a soft cloth, and rubbed in long strokes that follow the contours of the metal. The goal is a mirror finish, bright enough to reflect the sun and dazzle opponents, smooth enough that lance points will skitter across the surface rather than finding purchase. This is demanding work, requiring sustained pressure and careful attention to avoid creating scratches or uneven areas. His arms ache as he works through piece after piece. The breastplate alone takes nearly half an hour of continuous polishing, the metal slowly transforming from serviceable to spectacular. He catches glimpses of his own reflection in the curved surface, a young face, tired but determined, framed by the distortion of the metal's shape. This is the closest he comes to a mirror, these moments of seeing himself in the armor he maintains. The great helm receives special attention. It is the most visible piece of armor during the joust, the part that opponents and spectators will see most clearly. It is also the most important for protection, covering the head and face entirely, leaving only narrow slits for vision and small holes for breathing. The squire polishes every surface, inside and out, ensuring that the metal is clean and smooth, that nothing will obstruct vision or catch on padding. The weight of these pieces is significant, and handling them for extended periods builds a particular kind of strength. The squire's arms and shoulders have developed over years of this work, muscles trained for endurance rather than explosive power. He can hold a breastplate at arm's length for inspection, longer than most men could hold a much lighter object. This strength will serve him well when he eventually becomes a knight himself, when he must wear this armor rather than merely maintain it. The physical toll is real though. By the time he finishes the polishing, his shoulders burn with fatigue and his hands tremble slightly from exertion. He has been working for hours now, since before dawn, and he has not yet eaten or drunk anything. His body protests, but he has learned to ignore its complaints. There is too much still to do. He addresses the rust spots he identified earlier, using steel wool and oil to carefully remove the corrosion without damaging the surrounding metal. The loose rivet requires more significant intervention. He heats the end with a small brazier and hammers it tight, a repair that will hold for the day's activities, though a more permanent fix will be needed later. The scratch on the breastplate he addresses with extra polishing, reducing its visibility, though not eliminating it entirely. The armor is ready. It gleams in the morning light, each piece reflecting the sun that now streams through the window. The squire allows himself a moment of pride in his work, a brief acknowledgement that he has done well. Then he sets the feeling aside and moves on. The horse is waiting. The destrier stands in its stall, already alert and aware that today is different. War horses were bred and trained for combat, selected for size, strength, and temperament. They were not the placid creatures of farm work or casual riding. They were weapons in their own right, capable of striking with hooves, biting, and using their massive bodies to knock opponents down. They were also extraordinarily valuable, costing as much as a small estate, and their care was a responsibility that weighed heavily on those charged with it. The squire approaches the horse with the confidence of long familiarity. He has cared for this animal for years, knows its moods and preferences, understands the subtle signals of its body language. The horse knows him too, accepts his presence without alarm, turns its great head to acknowledge him with a soft whicker. Grooming begins with the currycomb, a tool with short, stiff bristles designed to loosen dirt and dead hair from the coat. The squire works in circular motions, starting at the neck and moving back along the body, applying pressure that the horse seems to enjoy. The animal's coat is dark, almost black, and as the dirt is removed, it begins to shine with the health that proper care provides. The body brush comes next, with longer, softer bristles that remove the loosened debris and smooth the coat. Then the mane and tail, carefully combed to remove tangles, the long hairs flowing freely when the work is complete. The face is cleaned with a soft cloth, the eyes and nostrils wiped gently, the ears checked for any sign of irritation or infection. The hooves require particular attention. A horse's hooves are its foundation, and any problem there affects everything else. The squire lifts each hoof in turn, the horse cooperating with the practiced ease of long habit, and uses a pick to remove any stones or debris lodged in the frog, the soft V-shaped area at the center of the hoof. He checks for cracks, for signs of thrush or other infections, for any abnormality that might indicate developing problems. The shoes are examined for wear and security. A loose shoe during a joust could be catastrophic. The relationship between squire and horse is different from the relationship between squire and knight, but no less important. The horse cannot speak, cannot give orders or offer praise, but it communicates constantly through its behavior and body language. The squire has learned to read these signals, to understand when the horse is calm or anxious, healthy or unwell, ready for work or in need of rest. This understanding is essential for the knight's safety. A squire who presents a horse that is not ready for combat is a squire who has failed in his duty. The tack comes next, the saddle and bridle that the squire oiled earlier, now to be fitted to the horse. The saddle blanket goes first, positioned carefully to prevent rubbing or bunching. Then the saddle itself, heavy and awkward to lift, settled onto the horse's back and secured with the girth strap. The squire checks the fit, ensuring that the saddle sits properly, that the weight is distributed evenly, that nothing will shift during the violent movements of combat. The bridle is a more delicate operation, requiring the horse to accept the metal piece that goes in its mouth and provides the primary means of control. This horse is well trained and accepts the bit without resistance, but the squire is gentle nonetheless, understanding that cooperation is more valuable than compliance. He adjusts the straps, checks the fit, ensures that everything is secure but not uncomfortable. The horse is ready, standing in its stall, with the patience of a creature that has done this many times before. It will wait here until the squire leads it to the tournament grounds, until the moment when knight and horse become a single unit of martial purpose. For now, it rests, conserving energy for the exertions to come. The squire pauses to run his hand along the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of the living creature beneath his palm. There is something grounding in this contact, a reminder that his work is not merely about objects, but about relationships between knight and squire, between rider and mount, between all the elements that must work together for success. He leaves the horse with a final pat and returns to his other duties. The morning is advancing, and the tournament grounds are growing loud with activity. The sounds of the tournament are building now, a crescendo that penetrates even the relative quiet of the preparation area. Trumpets announce the arrival of important nobles. Heralds call out in practiced voices, their words carrying across the field. The crowd murmurs and laughs and shouts, a living thing with its own moods and rhythms. Vendors cry their wares: meat, pies and ale, ribbons and favors, small tokens to commemorate the day. The squire works faster now, aware that time is running short. He lays out the armor in the order it will be donned, each piece in its designated position, ready to be lifted and fitted in the sequence that centuries of practice have refined. He checks his mental list one final time, running through every item, every task, every potential problem. The favors must be attached. These are tokens given by ladies to their chosen knights, small pieces of fabric or embroidery that are tied to armor or lance as symbols of support and affection. His knight has received such a favor from a noblewoman, whose name the squire knows but does not speak aloud. It is not his place to comment on his master's romantic entanglements. The favor is a length of silk in pale blue, and the squire ties it carefully to the crest of the great helm, where it will flutter visibly during the joust. Final adjustments occupy the next several minutes. A strap that seemed secure earlier now appears slightly loose. He tightens it. The lance coronals are checked one more time. The sword is placed in its scabbard, the dagger in its sheath. Everything must be perfect, or as close to perfect as human effort can achieve. The squire's own hunger and fatigue press at the edges of his awareness, demanding attention he cannot give. He has not eaten since the previous evening, has not slept more than a few hours, has been working continuously since before dawn. His body is tired in a way that goes beyond simple physical exhaustion. It is the tiredness of sustained concentration, of holding oneself to a standard that allows no relaxation. He ignores these sensations with the discipline that has been trained into him. There will be time to eat later, time to rest when the day's work is done. Now there is only the task at hand, only the preparation that must be completed. The knight arrives. He enters the preparation area with the easy confidence of a man who has done this many times, who knows his own capabilities and trusts in the work of those who serve him. He is perhaps 30 years old, in the prime of his physical powers, his body hardened by years of training and actual combat. He nods to the squire, a gesture of acknowledgement that carries more weight than casual observers might recognize. There is a transfer that happens in this moment, a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. The squire has been working alone, carrying the full weight of responsibility for the preparations. Now that weight is shared, the knight's presence providing a kind of validation that the work has been done correctly. If there were problems, this would be the moment when they would be discovered and addressed. The knight's calm demeanor suggests that he sees nothing amiss, that the squire has met the standard expected of him. They do not speak much. Words are not necessary between people who have worked together for years. The knight examines the armor with a practiced eye, running his hands over the same surfaces the squire checked hours ago. He tests the edge of the sword with his thumb, nods in satisfaction. He looks at the horse, standing ready in its stall, and something in his expression softens slightly affection for the animal that has carried him through so many contests. The tournament will begin soon. The squire feels the approaching moment like a physical pressure, a tightening in his chest that has nothing to do with his own safety. He will not be fighting today, will face no lances or swords, but his investment in the outcome is no less real for being vicarious. His knight's success is his success. His knight's failure is his failure. This is the nature of their relationship, the bond that makes the squire's exhausting labor meaningful. He begins the final preparations, the last tasks before the arming can begin. Water is fetched for the knight to drink, a light meal prepared, bread and cheese, and a small amount of wine, nothing heavy that might slow reflexes or upset the stomach. The knight eats quickly, efficiently, fueling his body for the exertions ahead. Meanwhile, the squire checks everything one more time. He cannot help himself. The habit of verification is too deeply ingrained. Every strap, every buckle, every piece of equipment receives one final inspection. He finds nothing wrong, which is both reassuring and somehow unsatisfying. The search for problems has become a form of comfort, a ritual that provides structure to his anxiety. The crowd roars outside, responding to something the squire cannot see. The tournament has begun. Other knights already taking the field. Other squires already watching their masters ride into the lists. Soon it will be his knight's turn. And then the waiting will be over, replaced by a different kind of tension. He takes a deep breath and prepares for the arming. The arming of a knight was a ritual, as much as a practical necessity. A ceremony that marked the transition from ordinary man to warrior. It followed a specific sequence, developed over centuries, that ensured each piece of armor was fitted correctly and would not interfere with the pieces that followed. The squire knew this sequence as intimately as he knew his own name, could perform it in darkness if necessary, could recite the order in his sleep. It began with the padded garments that would cushion the armor against the body, the arming doublet, a quilted jacket with points laces at specific locations where armor pieces would be attached. The squire helped his knight into this garment, adjusting the fit, ensuring that the points were accessible and untangled. Then the arming hose, similarly padded, protecting the legs from the metal that would soon encase them. The mail hauberk came next, the heavy garment of interlocked rings that the squire had cleaned and oiled earlier. Lifting it over the knight's head required both strength and coordination, the weight of the mail threatening to unbalance both men if handled carelessly. The squire had long ago learned the technique. Gather the mail at the neck, lift it high, and let the knight duck his head through the opening, then allow the weight to settle gradually onto his shoulders. The knight stood now in his padded garments and mail, already carrying significant weight, but not yet fully armored. The plate pieces would add more, transforming him from a man who could still move freely into a walking fortress of steel. The leg armor went on first, sabatons protecting the feet, greaves covering the shins, cuisses shielding the thighs. Each piece was attached with straps and buckles, the squire working quickly but carefully, testing each connection before moving on. The knight stood patiently, accustomed to this process, occasionally shifting his weight to help the squire access a difficult buckle. The breastplate and backplate came next, the core of the armor's protection. These were attached to each other with hinges and straps, forming a shell around the torso that would deflect most blows. The squire lifted the breastplate, that mirror-bright surface he had polished for so long, and positioned it against his knight's chest. The straps at the sides and shoulders were secured, each one tested for proper tension, tight enough to hold the armor in place, loose enough to allow breathing and movement. The armor followed, vambraces and rear braces, pauldrons at the shoulders, gauntlets for the hands. The articulation of these pieces was complex, designed to allow the full range of motion necessary for combat, while still providing protection. The squire checked each joint, ensured that the pieces moved smoothly against each other, that nothing would bind or catch at the wrong moment. Finally, the great helm. The squire lifted it carefully, that enclosed helmet with its narrow vision slits and breathing holes, and placed it over his knight's head. The padding inside cushioned the fit, and the chin strap secured it in place. The knight's face disappeared behind the steel, replaced by an impersonal mask that revealed nothing of the man within. The transformation was complete. Where a man had stood, there was now a knight in full armor, gleaming in the morning light, ready for combat. The squire stepped back to survey his work, checking every visible element for any sign of problem. He saw none. The knight moved experimentally, testing the armor's fit, the range of motion it allowed. He drew his sword, swung it in a practice arc, returned it to its scabbard. He nodded, the gesture barely visible through the great helm's eye slits. He was satisfied. Words were exchanged now, brief and practical. The knight reminded the squire of his duties during the tournament, to be ready with replacement lances, to have water available between bouts, to watch for any sign of equipment failure. The squire acknowledged each instruction, though he needed no reminding. These were the tasks he had performed at every tournament, the responsibilities that defined his role. Then, something more. The knight placed a gauntleted hand on the squire's shoulder, a gesture of connection that the armor made awkward but no less meaningful. He spoke words that the squire would remember for years afterward, words of acknowledgement and appreciation, words that recognized the work that had been done and the trust that had been earned. The squire felt something shift in his chest, pride and gratitude, and a fierce determination to be worthy of such recognition. The knight turned and walked toward the tournament grounds, his armor clanking softly with each step. The squire followed, leading the destrier, carrying the lances, ready to serve. The tournament itself was a blur of color and sound and violent motion. The squire watched from the edge of the lists, positioned where he could see his knight and be seen in return, ready to respond to any signal. He held the spare lances, checked and rechecked the equipment at his station, kept water ready for the moments between bouts. His knight jousted 3 times in the first round, breaking 2 lances and winning all 3 encounters. The squire felt each impact, as if it were his own body receiving the blow, tensed with every charge, released with every successful pass. When his knight's lance shattered against an opponent's shield, the squire was ready with a replacement, handing it up with practiced efficiency, receiving the broken shaft in return. The melee was more chaotic, a general combat in which multiple knights fought simultaneously. The squire could not always see his knight in the press of bodies, could only catch glimpses of familiar armor amid the confusion. He watched for any sign of trouble, any indication that equipment had failed, or that his knight was in difficulty. He saw none, though his heart raced with each moment of uncertainty. When it was over, when the heralds announced the results and the crowd cheered for the victors, the squire's knight was among those still standing. Not the overall champion, that honor went to another, but a creditable performance, a day of which to be proud. The squire felt relief wash through him, the tension of hours finally releasing. The post-tournament duties began immediately. The armor had to be removed, piece by piece, the reverse of the morning's ritual. The knight was sweating beneath the steel, exhausted in ways that the squire's fatigue could not match. But he was also exhilarated, energized by the competition and the success. The armor, when removed, showed the day's wear. Dents where lances had struck, scratches from sword blows in the melee, straps stretched by the violence of combat. The squire catalogued each mark, already planning the repairs that would be needed before the next tournament. The mail had held, the plate had protected, the equipment had done its job. The horse was tired too, its coat dark with sweat, its breathing heavy. The squire led it back to its stall, removed the tack, began the process of cooling down that would prevent injury. Water was offered in small amounts, the coat was walked dry, the hooves were checked for any damage from the day's exertions. Hours passed in this work, the sun moving across the sky, the tournament grounds gradually emptying as participants and spectators departed. The squire worked on, cleaning armor that would need more attention later, storing equipment properly, ensuring that everything was ready for transport back to their home estate. Finally, as evening approached, he was able to stop. The knight had dismissed him with words of praise, had given him a small coin as a token of appreciation. The squire sat alone in the preparation area, surrounded by the equipment he had tended all day, and allowed himself to feel the exhaustion he had been holding at bay. His body ached in ways he had not fully registered while working. His hands were raw from handling metal and leather, his shoulders stiff from hours of sustained effort, his legs tired from standing and walking and carrying. He was hungry, deeply hungry and thirsty, and tired beyond any normal experience of tiredness. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, something that made the suffering worthwhile. He had done his job well. His knight had ridden into combat with equipment that was as close to perfect as human effort could make it. Every piece of armor had functioned, every weapon had been ready, every element of preparation had contributed to the day's success. This was the satisfaction that sustained squires through their years of service, the quiet pride of work done with full attention and complete dedication. It was not the glory of the night, not the cheers of the crowd or the recognition of victory. It was something more private, more personal. The knowledge that one had met a standard of excellence, had fulfilled a responsibility, had been worthy of the trust placed in one. The medieval world understood this kind of satisfaction in ways that modern culture sometimes forgets. The craftsman who built a cathedral knew that his work would outlast him, that his contribution would be invisible to most who saw the finished structure, but he took pride in it nonetheless. The monk who copied manuscripts knew that his name would be forgotten while the texts he preserved would endure, but he copied with care and devotion. The squire who prepared a knight for combat knew that the glory would belong to another, but he prepared with the same dedication he would have brought to his own endeavors. This was not selflessness in the sense of having no self-interest. The squire hoped to become a knight himself, hoped that his service would lead to advancement and recognition, but it was a recognition that excellence in subordinate roles was valuable in itself, that the quality of one's work mattered regardless of who received credit for the outcome. The squire ate his delayed meal in the gathering darkness, simple food that tasted extraordinary after a day of deprivation. He drank water, and then a small amount of wine, feeling the liquid restore something that had been depleted. He would sleep well tonight, the deep sleep of genuine exhaustion, and tomorrow the work would begin again, cleaning, repairing, preparing for whatever came next. The tournament was over, but the life of service continued. There would be more tournaments, more days of pre-dawn rising and endless preparation, more moments of watching and waiting and hoping. There would be training sessions where the squire himself would practice the martial skills he was learning, moving closer to the day when he might earn his own spurs. There would be quiet days of routine maintenance and loud days of crisis and response. Through it all, the discipline would remain. The attention to detail, the methodical approach to complex tasks, the ability to maintain focus despite fatigue and distraction. These were the skills that tournament day tested and reinforced. They were skills that would serve the squire well, regardless of what his future held, whether he became a knight or found some other path through life. The medieval tournament was many things: a spectacle of martial prowess, a social event where nobles displayed their status, a training ground for the skills of war, an economic engine that supported craftsmen and merchants and entertainers. But it was also a crucible in which young men were shaped, where the values of their culture were enacted and reinforced, where the relationship between service and honor was made tangible. The squire who rose before dawn, who worked through exhaustion, who prepared equipment with meticulous care, who watched his knight ride into danger and stood ready to help. This squire was learning something that went beyond the specific skills of armor maintenance or horse care. He was learning what it meant to be responsible for outcomes he could not directly control, to invest himself fully in work that would be attributed to another, to find meaning in excellence rather than recognition. These lessons echo across centuries, connecting the medieval squire to anyone who was ever prepared for a performance they would not give, supported a project they would not lead, contributed to a success they would not claim. The specific context changes, but the underlying experience remains recognizable. The anxiety of preparation, the satisfaction of work well done, the quiet pride of having met a standard. The night settled over the tournament grounds, the sounds of celebration fading as participants and spectators found their rest. The squire sat alone with his thoughts, too tired to move yet not quite ready to sleep. Tomorrow there would be more work, always more work, the endless cycle of maintenance and preparation that defined his existence. But tonight, just for a moment, he could simply be. The day was done, the duties fulfilled, the responsibility discharged. His knight had ridden well on equipment that had not failed. The armor would need repair, the weapons would need sharpening, the horse would need care. But all of that was for tomorrow. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over countless tournaments, countless squires, countless moments of exhaustion and satisfaction. The young man looked up at them briefly, then rose and made his way to his small chamber, to the pallet of straw and rough wool that awaited him. He slept, and in his sleep perhaps he dreamed of the day when he would wear the armor rather than maintain it, when he would ride the destroyer rather than groom it, when he would be the knight rather than the shadow. But for now, the shadow was enough. The shadow had done its work, and done it well, and that was something worth carrying into dreams.